Hello and welcome back to Behind the Fade. It's a channel where we talk about all aspects of live sound mixing and live sound in general. And if you like the kind of content, please hit the subscribe button. It's free for you and helps me a lot. And by the way, I want to thank everybody who's already done that so much, because for a channel that has only been around for like a few weeks, the growth is pretty amazing. I mean, by the end of this day, I will probably be somewhere between 120 and 130 subscribers. And I already have got like a few thousand views. Pretty amazing. So thanks a lot again. Today I want to start a little series of videos that will show you step by step in all detail how to set up a desk file that is professional and will help your workflow to become very, very comfortable and convenient. And today we start with the basic layout of a desk file. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So here we are in front of a Yamaha DM7 offline editor, which I'd like to use for this. It doesn't mean that Yamaha are necessarily my favorite desks, but I like them, I use them a lot, and I like the layout of this editor. So I already made a little session or a desk file, and you've got to start somewhere, and I usually start with labeling my input channels. So this would be like a very basic pop rock band. So we have a kick, and by the way, I know about this kick in, kick out concept, but I don't know, it never worked for me, so I'm not using it. We have snare top, snare bottom, we have a hi-hat, we have very classic tom-tom layout, 2 rack toms, 1 floor tom. We have a ride cymbal because we can. We have 2 overheads. We have a bass DI, bass microphone. On the next layer we have electric guitar, acoustic guitar, stereo keyboards, and a vocal. And that's it. Now, in this scenario that I'm going to talk about, we need to do monitors from front of house. And in order to do this, there's a little bit more work about the input channels, because we have to split all these channels onto 2 channels. So we have separate control over front of house mix and monitor mix. And I've talked about this in my splitting channels video anyway, so if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description. It's obvious that you might want to apply a lot of stuff to the front of house channels that are not supposed to show up in the monitors. And also, it is very common these days that I will, after soundcheck, hand over my iPad to the band so they can correct their own monitoring. And of course, I don't want them to mess with my front of house channels. Also, at this point, now would be time to save the file for the first time, because you never know what happens. It's a computer after all. So save frequently. Now, I could of course start here on channel number 18 with my first monitor channel. However, that would make it a bit difficult to find the channels when you need to move quickly. So I just go to my next layer here, and here's the same layout as for front of house for my monitor channels. But one point is really crucial. Make sure you label your channels in a way that you always know what you're in front of, if you're just working on a front of house or a monitor layer. Trust me, if things can get really busy and hectic at times, and it's really convenient that it's a no-brainer to know where you are. So I do that in 2 ways. First of all, different color, as you can see. And my front of house channels all start with a capital letter, and the monitor channels don't. So that makes it really easy to detect where you are. So now there's a few more things to do with our monitor channels and make them work. First of all, the patch up here. By the way, if you're into Yamaha and Dante, of course, usually these inputs will come from a Dante stage rack, and it would be Dante 1, not Omni 1. So this is the desk's physical own input. But for the matter of this video, it doesn't really matter. Since this is channel 25, the default patch would of course come off input 25. So we have to change it to input 1 because we want to split our kick drum. And so that of course goes for all the other channels. So This 25 to 41, I think, has the same patch as 1 to 17. Next thing you want to do, for example, this channel is still routed to our main mix bus. And of course you have to take it off there. If it's still on there and you forget about it, it can be really confusing. Ask me how I know. And the next step is I bring all the faders of the monitor channels up to unity gain. Why? Because I run all my monitor sends post fader. Everything will be controlled by this fader. So that gives you the opportunity to change the level of a signal for everyone simultaneously without having to go into each separate mix. Or even if maybe something starts behaving funny, you can mute it for everyone at the same time. So that's really convenient, and it's if you run a monitor desk, you will always do it like this. So that's our input section done. So the one thing I will not cover in this video is mute groups, DCA groups, and subgroups, because there's a little bit more to that than you might think. It's a little more complex. So I will cover this in another video. So let's head over to our buses, aux sense and monitor sense. Now, first of all, you should, when you're starting out, you should play around a little and find a scheme that always works for you when it comes to your aux sense and monitor sense. First of all, you have to figure out, do you like your effect sense to be first, or you like your monitor sense to be first? There's no wrong or right. It's just what works best for you. So in my case, I start with effect sense. The important thing about a scheme is that it works for most scenarios and you always stick to it, which in my case means this first layer. I mean, in this case, this layer comes 12 mixes. Most layers, even the older Yamaha layers, always came in 8. So I'm pretty used to the 8 still, but this comes in 12, no big deal. So I will always have my effect sense at the beginning, and the last send of this layer, I didn't label that, and in this case, will, if I can, be my send to my subs. I still like my subs on an aux send. I know all the arguments against it, but I just like to do it that way. In this case, let's just pretend there's no way I can do this, so no subs. And I could also start with my monitor outputs right here, but I don't do it because my scheme is the first layer is always dedicated to effect sense, except this one channel for the subs. And of course, I will never use 11 or 12 effects, even if I just use 2. The rest of these will stay idle. But this layer is effect sense layer. So if we head out to the next, this will be my monitor sense. What makes it so convenient is I always know where my first monitor mix will be. Doesn't matter what desk I use, it's a no-brainer. First mix of the second layer is always my first monitor mix stage right, so the first one to my left. And my center is most of the time then the next one, unless I have more than one mix on stage right. And since most of the time, or even every time, the layout on the input channels follows the scheme of 12. So if I go to my monitor layer here, and I go to my second layer here, there's my monitor sense. And I know the second one will always be the center. I don't have to look for it in case even I have more than these few monitor sense. So another thing that I usually do, I'm old school, so I will still always insert a graphic EQ into my monitor sense. Some desks even have that built in already, so you don't even have to do it. If you grew up after graphic EQs were popular, you might use a parametric EQ, of course. Now we need to patch our monitor sense. And the thing is, on most desks, the default patch is that the first mix goes out output 1 and the second mix goes output 2. If you don't want to mess with that and not having to think about it, then you should probably start your mixes with monitor sense, because that way the patch is automatically set. In my case, I will have to repatch these. Now let's go back to the first layer. My effect setup is usually like this. The first one will be a reverb for the vocals, which is typically a hall. The second one is a drum reverb, which is typically a plate. Third one will be a delay, and I usually use just a simple mono tap delay. And the fourth one is just another reverb that I might apply, in this case, to the acoustic guitar, or sometimes you have a saxophone or a violin or something, or any additional instrument, so I just set up another reverb to use for these signal. And while we're at effects, of course, we then routed the effects. Let's go here. Here are my effects. No, that's EQs. Here are my effects. And of course, I routed them back to some return channels. And are right here. And another thing we have to do is go to our delay return. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And go to our Auxes and send the return of the delay back into the reverb vocal, so that the repeats, or the repeat, in my case, I set it in a way that it's kind of only one really audible repeat, but the repeat has the same effect on it like the initial signal. Some people don't do this. I find it natural, really. So that's about it for the buses. So the last thing for this video, every desk has user-definable keys these days. So I will now think about what parameters I want to have ready to go by these user-defined keys. And this will usually be the parameters of this, parameters of this. The delay, not so much, because I don't really change the parameters, but of course I need to dedicate the tab for the delay to one user-defined key. Parameters of this. After that, you might have to think about your graphic EQs for the monitors if you're using them. And oh, by the way, again, on the, the layout of these user-defined keys are very different on each desk. Well, the one thing I always stick to is the very last key is always my delay tab. That's another scheme I stick to. And as far as the basic setup goes, that's it. So that's it for today. And again, if you like this kind of content, please subscribe. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.